Hello friends, welcome to the learning series on the great scientists and technologists of the world. Today we are going to learn about Charles Darwin, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, an English naturalist, introduced the theory of evolution by natural selection, which became the foundation of modern evolutionary studies. Throughout his life, he maintained a sense of deep humility and a concern for his fellow man. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. The 12th of February in 1809 was a day on which two great people were born. Two people who would change our world forever. One of them was Abraham Lincoln, and the other was the son of Robert Darwin. Robert Darwin was a wealthy physician with one of the largest medical practices outside London. He and his wife lived in Shropshire, and they had just had a little baby boy they called Charles. Tiny Charles had a very good life. He went to the best school in town. He had a very upper-middle-class upbringing that gave him many opportunities. Although his mother died when he was 8 years old, tiny Charles still enjoyed a golden childhood. Encouraged by his adoring sisters, an older brother, and his large, wealthy family. Charles, a young boy at Shrewsbury School, was influenced by Dr. Samuel Butler's headmaster, who pushed him to study classical literature and scolded him for wasting time on chemical experiments. At 16, Charles studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh but was shocked by the lack of anesthetics in surgery. He grew disillusioned with medicine and pursued a career in natural history. Meeting zoologist Robert Grant and geologist Robert Jameson sparked his interest in marine animals and Earth's history. Charles's father was very disappointed with his son's poor performance in the study of medicine, so in 1827 he sent Charles to the University of Cambridge to study theology. At the university, Charles was taught that God had made man, and since God made man, man was the most supreme of all beings. Already Charles began to question things. This showed up in the poor marks he received in all his exams. Charles enjoyed socializing in sports at Cambridge, learning an entomologist who inspired him to collect beetles, despite Cambridge not offering a natural history degree. Charles met Reverend John Henslow, a botany professor who encouraged him to pursue his love for science. After graduating from Cambridge, Henslow encouraged Charles to embark on a sea voyage and explore the world. Charles was hesitant, for he had no experience whatsoever. Henslow convinced Charles to take the opportunity. So, Charles became an expedition naturalist and agreed to work on the ship HMS Beagle without any pay. On December 27, 1831, Charles Darwin sailed from Plymouth, England, on the HMS Beagle. The 3-year voyage would take the ship to survey the east and west coasts of South America and continue to the Pacific Islands. The many years Charles spent exploring the South American continent and the offshore islands of the Galapagos polished his skills as a collector, observer, and theorist. But Charles was not physically fit to be an explorer. He was often seasick and spent long periods of time ashore, whenever the opportunity arose. Charles was fascinated by the exotic tropics. Although he was a bit weak, he was adventurous. He experienced armed political rebellions, rode with the famous gauchos in Argentina, and collected and identified many rare species of animals and insects. Charles seemed to like danger, and on one occasion he managed to save a boat from a tidal wave, putting his life in danger. He wrote to one of his sisters, saying, "We have, in truth, the world before us. How many magnificent and characteristic views and how many curious tribes of men will we see? What are the fine opportunities for geology and for studying the infinite host of living beings? Is this not a prospect to keep up the most flagging spirit?" During the voyage of the Beagle, Charles Darwin transformed into an independent and adventurous scientist, fostering confidence in his observations and problem-solving abilities. The isolation and exposure to new phenomena allowed him to develop a unique combination of strengths, including dedication to fact-gathering and theorizing about facts. Charles sent many letters to Henslow. Letters that challenged the beliefs and theories of many leading scientists and naturalists. Henslow, in turn, read all these letters out to the scientific community. When Charles Darwin returned to England after 5 years, he was already a celebrity. Back home, Charles began to arrange his notes and theories. He continued to read voraciously in all fields of science to validate his theories. He was afraid, for he had stumbled upon a brand new theory. A theory that could actually prove that human beings were related to apes. A theory that could prove that man was not a superior animal. During this time, Charles married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. They had 10 children together. After living several years in London, they moved to a country house in Down, Kent. About 16 miles from the outskirts of London. Charles began to fall sick often and never again left the British Islands. He rarely traveled far from his home, Down House. Charles Darwin conducted experiments in his garden and wrote numerous books on geology, botany, and zoology. In 1859, he published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, proposing revolutionary theories of evolution and natural selection. He detailed how various forms of life evolved, excluding mankind's role. The book gained acceptance in scientific circles and became a bestseller. Darwin's controversial book was a significant contribution to the field of biology. In 1871, Charles Darwin published The Descent of Man, expanding the scope of evolution to show human psychological and physical similarities to apes. He argued that humans are no different from all other forms of life and have been influenced by natural selection forces. This book created controversy as it claimed humans evolved from Victorian-era people who believed they were direct descendants of God. Then, in 1872, Charles published The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, in which he dared to claim that most particularly human behavior was quite similar to the behavior of animals. Charles had several minor heart attacks, from which he never recovered. His condition worsened, and on April 19, 1882, at the age of 73, he died at Down House. Charles Darwin wished for a simple burial in his village. His scientific colleagues convinced his family to lay him to rest in Westminster Abbey, a few feet away from the grave of Sir Isaac Newton. Does any variety of apes eat meat/flesh of other animals? If you know the answer, please tell us in the comments section. Today we are going to learn about the Wright brothers, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 20th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers are most famous for their invention of the airplane. Their impact on the world was huge. Before their invention, people could only travel by ground or by water. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. In the little town of Hartsville, USA, there lived a bishop called Milton Wright. He was a simple, hard-working man with a wife and 7 children depending on him. They had very little money, and all his children were educated in simple public schools. Just like all the other children in their little town. In spite of all the hardships he faced, Bishop Wright was a strong-willed man. He encouraged his children to be independent thinkers with a deep confidence in their own talents. An unshakable faith in their judgment and a determination to carry on, in the face of disappointment. Unlike most of the other children, 2 of Bishop Wright's sons, Wilbur and Orville, never attended college. They were brilliant and adventurous boys. They did not like the strict structure of college education. From an early age, Wilbur and Orville showed a remarkable ability to innovate. Orville Wright would later say, "We grew up in a home where we were always encouraged to pursue intellectual interests and investigate whatever aroused our curiosity." Wilbur and Orville were fascinated by a flying toy their father brought home, which they found so fascinating that they became passionate about the art of flying. In the early days of aviation, primitive gliders were the only aircraft used. 2 brothers, Wilbur and Orville, discovered German glider pioneer Otto Lilienthal. Otto became their hero. After Lilienthal's death in a glider crash, the brothers decided to continue his experiments. They made their first controlled flight experiments using a small kite, allowing it to climb, dive, and turn at will. This marked their first success in controlled flight. Their keen interest and constant experiments in flying did not earn them any money. So, Orville, who had learned the printing trade, convinced Wilbur to join him in establishing a print shop. Their exceptional printing machines showcased their brilliance. In 1892, they opened a bicycle manufacturing and repair shop, and inventing their own self-oiling bicycle further demonstrated their brilliance. At the printing shop and the bicycle shop, they gained valuable experience that helped them a lot in the construction of flying machines. The profits they earned from the print shop and the bicycle operation gave them enough money to fund their aeronautical experiments. The Wright brothers' first attempts at building their own powered airplane were unsuccessful. Then one day Wilbur said, "We are failing only because we are trying to follow in the footsteps of other inventors who have tried to fly." So the Wright brothers decided that they would have to try something that no one else had tried before. To do this, they constructed their own wind tunnel to gather their own information. With the results of the wind tunnel tests in hand, the brothers began work on their third full-scale glider. This was a great success. Now the brothers were all set to try powered, sustained flight. They designed and built a four-cylinder engine with the help of Charles Taylor, a machinist whom they employed in the bicycle shop. On December 14, 1903, Wilbur Wright attempted to fly their first powered plane but accidentally stalled and crashed into the ground. It had minor damage. After 3 days of making repairs, Wilbur and Orville decided to give it another go. At about 10:35 on the morning of December 17, 1903, Orville got on the plane. He was afraid, but he remembered the words his father said to him, "Believe in yourself, and you will succeed." Orville said a small prayer and started the engine. Orville felt the bumpy ground rumbling beneath him. Then suddenly, there was no more rumbling. Orville felt himself soar into the air, and he shouted in glee. Wilbur and Orville Wright had become the first people on Earth to fly a powered aircraft and control it. Orville and Wilbur Wright made history with their first flight, covering 120 feet in 12 seconds. 5 local citizens witnessed the event and celebrated the Wright brothers' accomplishment. However, the Wrights wanted to improve their airplane, building and flying 2 more in 1904 and 1905. By October 1905, they could remain aloft for up to 39 minutes, performing circles and other aerobatics. The Wright brothers knew that they had invented a powerful machine. They knew that if they did not patent it, others would copy their invention and call it their own. So the brothers decided to stop flying until patents protected their invention. After receiving patents for their invention, the Wrights signed a contract for the sale of an airplane to the U.S. Army in February 1908. They received $25,000 for delivering a machine capable of flying for at least 1 hour with a pilot and a passenger at an average speed of 40 miles (65 kilometers) per hour. Just to prove that their invention was safe, Wilbur carried the first airplane passenger, a mechanic named Charles Furnace, on May 14, 1908. Once this was done, Wilbur sailed to France to show their invention to the people in Europe. Meanwhile, Orville had begun the U.S. Army trials at Fort Myer. After 14 days of trials, tragedy struck. As Orville and his passenger, Lieutenant Thomas E. Selfridge, took off, a propeller on the plane broke, and the plane crashed. Orville was seriously injured, and his passenger was killed instantly. 6 years after their first flight, in November 1909, the Wright brothers set up the Wright Company, with Wilbur as president and Orville as vice president. They began manufacturing planes, training pilots, and continuing to improve their inventions. At heart, Wilbur was a simple boy from Hartsville who dared to fly. He was truly exhausted by business and legal concerns. And then things became worse, and Wilbur suffered an attack of typhoid fever. Wilbur died in his bed early on the morning of May 30, 1912. Orville, a man who had never married and relied on each other for support, found strength in his father's training and took over leadership of the Wright Company, remaining with the firm until 1918. Orville, a celebrity like his brother, was a humble boy who loved flying and spending time with his friends and family in his home, despite his dislike for public speaking. In January 1948, Orville suffered a heart attack. He died 3 days later, surrounded by his loved ones, at a hospital in Dayton, the town where he was born. One of the Wright brothers' closest friends seemed to sum up their lives. He said, "They were just simple boys who taught men to fly." Today we are going to learn about Max Planck, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 20th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about Max Planck. Max Carl Ernst Ludwig Planck, a German theoretical physicist, won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918 for his discovery of energy quanta. He is renowned for his role in originating quantum theory, which revolutionized understanding of atomic and subatomic processes. Planck's constant is crucial for quantum physics and is used to derive Planck units. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. His paternal great-grandfather and grandfather were both theology professors in Göttingen. His father was a law professor at the University of Kiel and Munich. One of his uncles was also a judge. Planck was born on April 23, 1858, in Kiel, Holstein, to Johann Julius Wilhelm Planck and his second wife, Emma Patzig. Planck came from a traditional, intellectual family. Marx was indicated as the appellation name. However, by age of 10, he had signed with the name Max and used it for the rest of his life. He enrolled in the Maximilian Gymnasium School in Munich, where he developed his mathematical talents. Hermann Müller, a mathematician, taught him astronomy, mechanics, and mathematics. Planck learned the principle of conservation of energy from Müller. He graduated at age 17 and became interested in physics. Planck was gifted in music, taking singing lessons and playing piano, organ, and cello. He composed songs and operas, but chose to study physics instead. Planck studied hydrogen diffusion through heated platinum at the University of Munich under Professor Philipp von Jolly. He later transferred to theoretical physics, but Jolly advised against it. In 1878, Jolly believed physics was almost complete, with the discovery of the principle of conservation of energy potentially taking its final stable form. In 1877, he studied at Friedrich Wilhelm's University in Berlin with the physicists Hermann von Helmholtz, Gustav Kirchhoff, and Karl Weierstrass. He became close friends with Helmholtz and self-studied Rudolf Clausius's writings, leading him to choose thermodynamics as his field. In 1878, Planck passed his qualifying exams, and in February 1879, he defended his dissertation über den zweiten Hauptsatz der mechanischen Wärmetheorie, on the second law of mechanical heat theory. He briefly taught mathematics and physics at his former school in Munich. By the year 1880, Planck had obtained the two highest academic degrees offered in Europe. The first was a doctorate degree after he completed his paper detailing his research and theory of thermodynamics. He then presented thesis called Gleichgewichtzustand isotroper Körper in verschiedenen Temperaturen, equilibrium states of isotropic bodies at different temperatures, which earned him habilitation. Planck, a German academic, became an unpaid Privatdozent in Munich after completing his habilitation thesis. Despite being initially ignored, he continued his work on heat theory, discovering a thermodynamical formalism similar to Gibbs. Clausius's ideas on entropy were central to his work. In 1885, he was appointed as an associate professor of theoretical physics at the University of Kiel. Planck's work on entropy and its treatment, particularly in physical chemistry, led to the publication of his treatise on thermodynamics in 1897. Planck was appointed as successor to Kirchhoff at Friedrich Wilhelm's Universität in Berlin in 1889. He became a full professor in 1892 and was offered Ludwig Boltzmann's position in Vienna in 1907. Planck was invited to become the Ernest Kempton Adams Lecturer in Theoretical Physics at Columbia University in 1909, where his lectures were translated and co-published. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1914 and retired in 1926. He was succeeded by Erwin Schrödinger and was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. As a professor at the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität in Berlin, Planck joined the local physical society. He later wrote about this time, "In those days, I was essentially the only theoretical physicist there, so things were not so easy for me because I started mentioning entropy, but this was not quite fashionable since it was regarded as a mathematical spook." Thanks to his initiative, many local physical societies in Germany merged in 1898 to form German Physical Society, Deutsche Physikalische Gesellschaft, DPG. From 1905 to 1909, Planck was president. In 1894, Planck addressed the issue of black-body radiation, a problem previously addressed by Kirchhoff in 1859. The question aimed to understand how the intensity of electromagnetic radiation emitted by a black body depends on the radiation frequency and body temperature. Despite experimental exploration, no theoretical treatment agreed with the observed evidence. Wilhelm Wien proposed Wien's law, which predicted behavior at high frequencies but failed at low frequencies. The Rayleigh-Jeans law, another approach, agreed with experimental results at low frequencies but created the ultraviolet catastrophe at high frequencies. In 1899, Planck proposed a solution to the problem of radiation by using the principle of elementary disorder. He derived Wien's law from assumptions about the entropy of an ideal oscillator, creating the Wien-Planck law. However, experimental evidence did not confirm the new law, leading Planck to revise his approach and create the first version of the Planck blackbody radiation law. This law described the experimentally observed blackbody spectrum and was first proposed at a meeting of the DPG in 1900. Planck revised this version, relying on Boltzmann's statistical interpretation of the second law of thermodynamics. Planck was skeptical of the philosophical and physical implications of this interpretation, and his decision to use it was seen as an act of despair. The central assumption behind his new derivation, presented to DPG end of 1900, was the supposition, now known as Planck postulate, that electromagnetic energy could be emitted only in quantized form. In other words, the energy could only be a multiple of an elementary unit, E equals h nu, where h is Planck's constant, also known as Planck's action quantum, and nu is the frequency of the radiation. Note that elementary units of energy discussed here are represented by h nu and not simply nu. Physicists call these quanta photons. A photon of frequency nu will have its own specific and unique energy. The total energy at that frequency is then equal to h nu multiplied by the number of photons at that frequency. Planck's discovery of quantum physics, which is now considered the birth of quantum physics, is considered his greatest intellectual accomplishment. He defined a new universal set of physical units, such as Planck length and mass, based on fundamental physical constants. Planck described his discovery as a discrete discovery comparable to Newton's. In 1918, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his contribution to a new branch of physics. This discovery is considered the greatest intellectual accomplishment of Planck's career. Planck was living in the apartment in Berlin. The Planck family lived in a villa in Berlin-Grunewald. The tradition of jointly performing music had already been established in the home of Helmholtz. Several other professors from the University of Berlin lived nearby, among them theologian Adolf von Harnack, who became a close friend of Planck. Soon, the Planck home became a social and cultural center. Numerous well-known scientists, such as Albert Einstein, Otto Hahn, and Lise Meitner, were frequent visitors. After World War II ended, Planck died on October 4, 1947. He was buried in the old Stadtfriedhof, city cemetery, in Göttingen. Today we are going to learn about Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to know about Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, a scientist who discovered X-rays, had ushered in the age of modern physics and revolutionized the process of medical diagnosis. In 1901, he received the first ever Nobel Prize for Physics. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. It was the 27th of March 1845, in the small village of Lennep, Prussia. Charlotte Röntgen, the wife of a cloth merchant, gave birth to a boy child. They named him Wilhelm Conrad. As she cradled him in her arms, she said, "Someday you will grow up to be a great man." When Wilhelm was 3 years old, his family moved to the Netherlands. There, Wilhelm went to a boarding school called the Institute of Martinus Herman van Doorn. Little Wilhelm did not show any special ability to study. He was a born nature lover. He loved to roam in the open country and forests. And whenever he had the opportunity, he would take off on long treks into the mountains. When he was at home, Wilhelm would mess around with any tools he could find. He slowly developed a skill for making mechanical devices. His father spotted his son's talent and decided to send him to a technical school in Utrecht in 1862. But unfortunately for poor Wilhelm, he was mistakenly accused of producing a cartoon of one of the teachers. Although someone else had done it, Wilhelm was expelled from the school. Wilhelm did not want to stop studying. He knew that he did not possess the qualifications to enter a university as a regular student. So, he found out about a polytechnic in Zurich. He found that he could enter the polytechnic by passing the entrance exam, so Wilhelm wrote the exam. He had no trouble passing the exam, and he began his studies as a student of mechanical engineering. At the Polytechnic, Wilhelm met two people who greatly influenced him. They were two professors called Clausius and Kunt. Wilhelm attended their lectures and worked in their laboratories. This inspired him to greater heights. In 1869, Wilhelm graduated with a PhD from the University of Zurich. He was appointed as an assistant to Kunt and went with him to Würzburg in the same year. After 3 years, Wilhelm traveled to Strasbourg. In 1870, Wilhelm Röntgen published his first work, dealing with the specific heats of gases. He followed this up a few years later with a paper on the thermal conductivity of crystals. His research included studying quartz's electrical properties as well as other properties, how pressure affects different fluids' refractive indices, how electromagnetic influences alter the planes of polarized light, how temperature and compressibility affect water and other fluids, and the phenomena that occur when oil drops spread across water. In 1875, he was appointed professor at the Academy of Agriculture at Hohenheim in Württemberg. In 1876, he returned to Strasbourg as professor of physics, and 3 years later, he accepted the invitation to the chair of physics at the University of Gießen. Wilhelm continued to travel between universities, learning and teaching in the process. He spent time at the University of Würzburg and then settled down at the University of Munich in the chair of physics. One day in November 1895, while Wilhelm was experimenting with the emissions from a Crookes tube, a glass vacuum tube with electrodes at either end, he made a discovery. By accident, he found that a paper plate covered with barium platinocyanide would still glow a fluorescent hue if the discharge tube was sealed inside a thick black box, blocking off all light. Wilhelm was very excited. He continued to experiment with these strange new rays he had discovered. During the experiments, he began recording the rays on a photographic plate. He found that objects of different thickness, placed in the path of the rays, showed different levels of transparency on the photographic plate. Then an idea struck him. He asked his wife Anna to place her hand in front of the rays and captured the image of her hand on a photographic plate. He was amazed to find that in the photo, his wife's hand showed the shadows thrown by the bones of her hand and a ring she was wearing. This was surrounded by the fainter shadow of the flesh. This was the first Röntgenogram ever taken. Wilhelm continued to experiment and showed that the new rays are produced by the impact of cathode rays on a material object. Since he did not know the nature of these rays, Wilhelm Röntgen simply named them X-rays. Röntgen explained the fundamental laws of his X-rays in 3 scientific papers, published in 1895, 1896, and 1897. This caused worldwide excitement. The newspapers called them Röntgen rays, and soon hospitals started using them to check fractured limbs, etc. Almost immediately, people also found out that dangerous burns could be caused by long-term exposure to X-rays. They also found out that this could lead to cancer. In spite of this, X-rays became very popular in the fields of medical treatment, dental examinations, industrial inspections of metal work, and many other areas. This made Wilhelm Röntgen world famous. Many honors were showered upon him. In some cities, streets were named after him, and he earned a huge collection of prizes, medals, honorary doctorates, and honorary memberships at intellectual societies in Germany as well as abroad. Although he was world famous, Wilhelm remained a strikingly modest and shy man. Throughout all his fame and fortune, he never forgot his love for nature and the outdoors. He spent many vacations at his summer home at the foot of the Bavarian Alps. There, he entertained his friends and went on many expeditions into the mountains. Although he was more than once involved in a dangerous situation, he continued to be an enthusiastic mountaineer as long as he was able. Wilhelm Röntgen was a friendly and courteous man who was always very shy about having an assistant. He preferred to work alone. He built most of the apparatus he used with great ingenuity and experimental skill. Although he was offered many highly prized positions at famous universities, he continued to teach at the University of Munich until his retirement in 1920. In February 1923, just 4 years after his wife died, Wilhelm Röntgen developed an infection of the intestine and died. He had left behind a world that would forever be indebted to him for having discovered the life-saving X-ray. Today we are going to learn about the James Clerk Maxwell, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 19th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about the James Clerk Maxwell. James Clerk Maxwell, a Scottish physicist, developed the classical theory of electromagnetic radiation, describing electricity, magnetism, and light as distinct manifestations of the same phenomenon. Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism have been called the second great unification in physics, where the first one had been realized by Isaac Newton. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. James Clerk Maxwell, born on June 13, 1831, in Edinburgh, Scotland, was a Scottish physicist best known for his formulation of electromagnetic theory. He is regarded by most modern physicists as the scientist of the 19th century who had the greatest influence on 20th century physics, and he is ranked with Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein for the fundamental nature of his contributions. Maxwell came from a comfortable middle-class background. The original family name was Clerk. The additional surname was added by his father, who was a lawyer, after he had inherited the Middleby estate from his Maxwell ancestors. James was an only child. His parents had married late in life, and his mother was 40 years old at the time of his birth. Shortly afterward, the family moved from Edinburgh to Glenlair, the country house on the Middleby estate. At 16, Maxwell entered the University of Edinburgh and published 2 scientific papers. He later went to the University of Cambridge, where his exceptional powers were recognized. His mathematics teacher, William Hopkins, praised Maxwell as an extraordinary man but noted his deficiency in analysis. Maxwell's preference for geometrical methods was reflected in his formulas that obtained correct results from faulty mathematical arguments. His exceptional abilities were later reflected in his significant contributions to mathematics. In the next 5 years, he published 2 classic papers on the electromagnetic field, demonstrated color photography, and was elected to the Royal Society in 1861. He also conducted theoretical and experimental work on gas viscosity, leading to a lecture in 1866. He supervised the experimental determination of electrical units for the British Association for the Advancement of Science, leading to the establishment of the National Physical Laboratory. In 1865, Maxwell resigned his professorship at King's College and retired to the family estate in Glenlair. He continued to visit London every spring and served as an external examiner for the mathematical tripos at Cambridge. In the spring and early summer of 1867, he toured Italy. But most of his energy during this period was devoted to writing his famous treatise on electricity and magnetism. It was Maxwell's research on electromagnetism that established him among the great scientists of history. In the preface to his treatise on electricity and magnetism, 1873, the best exposition of his theory, Maxwell stated that his major task was to convert Faraday's physical ideas into mathematical form. In attempting to illustrate Faraday's law of induction, that a changing magnetic field gives rise to an induced electromagnetic field, Maxwell constructed a mechanical model. He found that the model gave rise to a corresponding displacement current in the dielectric medium, which could then be the seat of transverse waves. On calculating the velocity of these waves, he found that they were very close to the velocity of light. Maxwell concluded that he could scarcely avoid the inference that light consists in the transverse undulations of the same medium, which is the cause of electric and magnetic phenomena. The Maxwell relations of equality between different partial derivatives of thermodynamic functions are included in every standard textbook on thermodynamics. Though Maxwell did not originate the modern kinetic theory of gases, he was the first to apply the methods of probability and statistics to describe the properties of an assembly of molecules. Thus, he was able to demonstrate that the velocities of molecules in a gas, previously assumed to be equal, must follow a statistical distribution. In later papers, Maxwell investigated the transport properties of gases, i.e., the effect of changes in temperature and pressure on viscosity, thermal conductivity, and diffusion. In 1871, Maxwell was elected to the new Cavendish professorship at Cambridge. He set about designing the Cavendish laboratory and supervised its construction. Maxwell had few students, but they were of the highest caliber and included William D. Niven, John Ambrose Fleming, Richard Tetley Glazebrook, John Henry Poynting, and Arthur Schuster. During the Easter term of 1879, Maxwell took ill on several occasions. He returned to Glenlair in June, but his condition did not improve. He died on November 5, after a short illness. Maxwell received no public honors and was buried quietly in a small churchyard in the village of Parton, in Scotland. Today we are going to learn about Willis Haviland Carrier, one of the most famous and renowned scientists of the 20th century. Kindly watch till the end to learn about Willis Haviland Carrier. Willis Haviland Carrier was an American engineer best known for inventing modern air conditioning. Carrier invented the first electrical air conditioning unit in 1902. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos. Let's go into the video. The Carriers were a family of very tough and hard-working pioneers. On November 26, 1876, Dwayne and Elizabeth Haviland had a baby. They named him Willis Haviland Carrier. Little Willis Carrier grew up as the only child in a household of adults. His parents, grandparents, and a great-aunt surrounded him. With no young friends around him, Willis became accustomed to playing alone. He made up his own games, many of which revolved around mechanics. One day, little Willis saw the statue of a deer on his grand-aunt's table. He was fascinated by the statue and decided to build a whole set of animals. He dreamed of putting machines into them so that they could move around. In fact, he kept coming up with ideas to mechanize the entire farm. When he was 9 years old, Willis attended arithmetic class in the one-room school at Evans Center. At the school, he was taught fractions. Willis was dumbfounded. Try as he might, he could not seem to grasp the meaning of fractions. When his mother noticed that he was having difficulty, she decided to help him. One day, Willis watched in amazement as his mother cut the apples into halves, quarters, and eighths and added and subtracted the parts to show him what fractions were all about. From that day on, fractions took on new meaning, and Willis was very proud. He felt as if he had made a great discovery. In fact, Willis would later on say, "From that day onwards, no problems would be too hard for me. I'd simply break them down to something simple, and then they would be easy to solve." From then on, Willis did very well at school. Willis learned a lot from his mother. Unfortunately, Willis's mother died when he was 11 years old. But luckily for him, his father's sister, Aunt Abby, came to live with them. She was as mechanically inclined as Willis's mother, and she left a lasting impression on Willis. She explained how the pump worked and stated, "The atmosphere exerts a pressure of about 15 pounds per square inch." That was the first time Willis had heard of atmospheric pressure. This was a turning point in Willis's life. He became very interested in the study of air and air pressure. In the fall of 1890, Willis entered Angola Academy. Each morning, Willis got up at 5 o'clock and helped his father milk 24 cows. Once that was over, Willis would deliver the cans of milk by wagon. He would then ride home, have breakfast, and walk a mile across the fields to school. During this time, Willis became obsessed with the idea of becoming an engineer. He had no trouble winning a state scholarship and entered Cornell University. Since he was not very wealthy, Willis had to earn his own room and board money by mowing lawns and stoking furnaces. During his year at the university, he formed a cooperative student laundry. It was here that he met Edith Seymour, whom he would soon marry. In 1901, Willis graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. After graduation, he got a job with the Buffalo Forge Company. The company manufactured heaters, blowers, and air exhaust systems. His first job was that of a heating engineer in a new experimental department at Buffalo Forge. While designing heating systems, Willis started his own research program to determine how much heat the air would hold. This research helped the company's engineers accurately estimate how much heater surface area was needed to heat a given space. This helped save the company $40,000. At the age of 25, Willis Carrier was assigned to solve a humidity problem at a printing plant in Brooklyn. Moisture inside the plant was creating a lot of problems in the printing process. Willis determined what the proper moisture level for printing should be and reviewed the national weather tables to determine the precise temperature to maintain appropriate moisture levels. He then talked about designing cooling equipment to bring the temperature inside the plant to that humidity level. Authorities recognized this new way of adjusting air levels and specifying temperatures for cooling water that flows through refrigeration coils as the first scientific air conditioning system. This was quite an accomplishment for Willis. Willis quickly improved this system with other mechanisms to control heat and humidity. One smoggy day, while standing on a railroad platform, Willis wondered how temperature affected the smog. It was then that he hit upon the idea of creating moisture by using a nozzle originally designed to spray insecticide. He patented the apparatus for treating air, which made dew point control possible. This was the fundamental basis for the development of the air conditioning industry. By 1914, Carrier had designed and installed air conditioning systems for manufacturing plants, department stores, soap, etc. But then tragedy struck when World War I broke out. This forced the Buffalo Forge Company to stop investing in its subsidiary company. He and 6 of his colleagues staked their personal savings of $32,600, along with their futures, in a new company they called Carrier Low Engineering Corporation. By the 1920s, Willis began refining and improving his invention so that air conditioning could be applied to benefit the health and comfort of the public. Carrier air conditioning systems could control the atmosphere in their industries and offices. Work improved, businesses boomed, and everyone began to prosper. Willis installed his cooling system for many prestigious clients, including Madison Square Garden, the U.S. House and Senate Chambers, and the White House. The carrier company soon began to air-condition atomic submarines, the first bus, railroad cars, and even planes. Willis Carrier had invented and patented over 80 different air conditioners. He traveled far and became every engineer's hero. Willis died at the age of 73 at his home, in New York. Willis Carrier was a dreamer, but he based his dreams on reality. In his own words, he said, "I fish only for edible fish and hunt only for edible game, even in the laboratory."
Kindly watch till the end to know the unknown areas of Einstein's personality. Let's go into the video. Albert Einstein was born on the 14th of March, 1879. Their family moved to Munich after his birth, where his father and uncle set up a small workshop. He was alone and very slow in developing. After the age of 3, Einstein started speaking. He was convinced that something behind things, something deeply hidden, made them act in the way they do. He was educated at a German Catholic school until the age of 9. Einstein did not like school and he was a weak student. Einstein studied music and learned to play violin at his mother's request. He left school without passing and returned to Milan, Italy, to reunite with his family. His uncles motivated in Einstein a passion for mathematics and an interest in science. Einstein slowly began to progress with his studies in this favorable environment. His sights were on becoming a theoretical physicist. By the time he attended the Swiss Cantonal School in 1895, he showed remarkable experience in problem-solving exercises. At the Zurich Polytechnical School, he studied and taught at the same time. In 1902, he acquired his first real job as a patents examiner in Switzerland. He was there for 7 years. It intellectually stimulated him while leaving him enough time to conduct his own quantum theory research. Einstein received his PhD from the University of Zurich in 1903 and started publishing his important papers. Einstein introduced a new viewpoint on light structure. The theory is that light is made up of smoothly oscillating electromagnetic waves, which was universally accepted. Einstein demonstrated that light was actually made up of quanta particles of moving energy. The electrodynamics of moving bodies, Einstein's most famous theory of relativity, was first published in his paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. This theory began with an essay Einstein wrote it when he was 16 years old. Einstein published his fourth paper, "Does the inertia of a body depend on its energy content?" in the mathematical progression of his theory. He explained this relationship in the famous E equals mc squared equation, saying that the energy E of a quantity of matter with mass m is equal to the product of the mass and the square of the velocity of light. His special theory of relativity was widely accepted in 1912, when he was a full professor at his old Polytechnic. The 1921 Nobel Prize for Physics had been awarded to him for photoelectric law and work in the field of theoretical physics. Einstein spent as much time promoting world peace as he did discussing science as a visiting professor at the University of Oxford in 1931. Albert Einstein usually arrived by third-class train carriage with a violin tucked under his arm at each destination. As Hitler got stronger, Einstein realized he and his family had to leave Europe as soon as possible. Rabindranath Tagore and Einstein had many philosophic dialogues. Tagore and Einstein discussed the nature of truth. Einstein believed in the independency of scientific truth from humanity. He believed in a God who provides himself to us in the world. In addition, he speaked out against the suppression. Einstein's life was unique in many ways. He described himself as a loner. Children were always a soft spot for Einstein. Albert Einstein died on April 18, 1955. His theories helped creating the terrible atomic and hydrogen bomb. Albert Einstein will be remembered as one of the greatest scientists of all time.
We're going to study about Thomas Alva Edison and Nicholas Tesla today, one of the most well-known and prominent scientists of the 19th century. Please watch till the end to learn about Thomas Alva Edison and Nicholas Tesla. If you like it, please give a thumbs up and share this video to your friends and relatives. Now let's watch this video. Thomas Alva Edison. Samuel and Nancy Edison were very proud parents. It was the 11th of February 1847 and they had their 7th child. A healthy little boy they called Thomas Alva. From the day he was born, in Ohio, USA, till he was a grown man, they would call him Alva. At a very early age little Alva developed hearing problems, but this was not unusual, for many members of the Edison family had the same problem. None of the Edisons realize what an impact this small handicap would have on little Alva's life and on the shape of our world. In 1854, when little Alva was 7 years old, his father got a job as a lighthouse keeper and carpenter at a military post in Port Huron. The entire family moved there. They moved into a big spacious house, with a large basement. This was when little Alva entered school. School was a disaster. Although little Alva was intelligent, imaginative and inquisitive, he could not follow any of the lessons in class. This was due to his hearing problem. Instead of understanding his problem, the school called poor little Alva a misfit who was poor in his studies. So little Alva's parents decided to keep him at home and teach him as best as they could. At home, little Alva became a voracious reader. He read anything he could lay his hands on. In particular, the books that contained scientific experiments fascinated little Alva. He was so fascinated that he soon set up his own little laboratory in the spacious basement under his house. He stocked his secret laboratory with chemicals and at the tender age of 10, little Alva began conducting his very first experiments. One day his mother came barging into his secret laboratory. She shouted, "Alva! What is that bad smell that is coming from down here? What are you doing?" The bad smell came from the chemicals that little Alva was using. Forced to close his laboratory, little Alva soon became very bored. He tried attending school for a short while, but just could not cope up. In 1859, Alva quit school and began working on the trains that passed between Port Huron and Detroit. On the train, Alva started selling candy, dried fruit, snacks, and newspapers. Just 3 years later Alva made history. While riding the train, Alva hit upon an idea. He said to himself, "Why don't I start up a newspaper on the train? All I will need is a second-hand printing machine." Alva found the printing machine and set it up in the baggage car of the train. And that's how the Weekly Herald was born. It was the first newspaper to be published aboard a moving train. After a short while Alva turned his attention to telegraphy. It was a booming business and Alva was keen on learning all about it. He joined as an apprentice telegrapher in 1863. Alva liked telegraphy because his partial deafness did not create any problems, since all telegraph messages were sent in Morse code. A series of dots and dashes that appeared on a strip of paper. Once they were decoded, they could be read. Soon the telegraph office began introducing sound keys that enabled the telegrapher to hear the Morse code. Alva's partial deafness was once again giving him trouble. Thomas Alva Edison never gave up. He uses his imagination and insight to improve and invent new equipment that could convert the Morse code into printed letters. In the midst of all of this, Alva began working on small inventions. His first patent in 1868 was for a vote recorder that speeded up the vote counting process. But unfortunately, no one seemed interested in buying his invention. Alva vowed not to invent anything unless he was sure that it had commercial value. He stuck to this vow, and by 1869 he had successfully invented a stock ticker for Wall Street. It is a telegraph capable of transmitting two messages on the same wire and a printer that converted electrical signals into letters. Satisfied with his progress, Alva gave up his job in the telegraph office and became a full-time inventor and entrepreneur. Thomas Alva Edison moved to New York City and entered into a partnership with Frank Pope, a famous electrical expert. Together they developed and produced the Edison Universal Stock Printer. In 1871, Edison married a 16-year-old girl called Mary Stilwell. A few years later, Edison developed a new telegraph machine. This machine was capable of transmitting four messages at the same time. In December 1874, Jay Gould, a railroad baron, paid Edison $100,000 for the rights to the new machine. It was the largest payment for any invention at the time. Although they had the money, Edison and his wife could not save money. To reduce his temptation to spend money, Edison requested his father to build a laboratory and machine workshop in Menlo Park. In March 1876, Edison moved there with two of his associates, Charles Batchelor and John Cruacy. Together they made the perfect team. At this time the telephone was gaining popularity. But Edison found it difficult to hear the voice on the phone. Once again, Edison's partial deafness leads him to invent something wonderful. In 1877, Edison and his team had perfected a carbon button transmitter that would amplify the sound of the voice on telephone. An invention that is still used in modern phones. Edison's world was suddenly shattered when his wife died, leaving him with 3 young children. Unable to take care of them on his own, Edison married 20-year-old Mina Miller. He built a new home for his bride and a sprawling new laboratory nearby. This was the world's first industrial research laboratory. It was in this very laboratory that Edison developed many of his famous inventions. Edison focused his attention on the light bulb at first. The electric lamps that existed at the time were short-lived and cumbersome. After making more than 1,200 experiments, Edison hit upon an idea. He passed electricity through a carbonized thread. The thread passed through a vacuum-filled glass tube. When the electricity flowed through it, the bulb lit up brightly. With the success of his light bulb behind him, Edison began perfecting the phonograph. A revolving machine that recorded and reproduced sound. Then Edison came up with the brilliant idea of linking the phonograph to a gadget called the zoetrope. This gadget was used by photographers to create an illusion of movement. After carefully studying the work of others who had tried, Edison and his associate, William Dixon, succeeded in constructing a movie camera and a viewing instrument. With his new invention, Edison shot the world's first motion picture. A silent movie nicknamed Black Maria. At the time, Edison also started work on an alkaline battery. After a phenomenal 10,296 experiments, he invented a battery that could store electricity. To his surprise, the battery became very popular. And soon he began supplying them to submarines and electric vehicles. In 1912, Henry Ford, one of Edison's greatest admirers, asked him to design a battery for the self-starter in the new Ford cars. During World War I, Edison became the head of the Naval Consulting Board, and for 3 years he worked on inventions to help the U.S. Navy. His inventions included devices that could detect torpedoes as soon as they were fired, a loudspeaker telephone so that a conversation could be carried on in the middle of a battle, and a glare eliminator to make it possible for ships to see periscopes. Throughout his life, Edison always invented for necessity. Besides holding the record for having created the world's first industrial research laboratory, Edison was the first inventor to hold 1,093 patents for his inventions. When Edison died in October 1931, at his home in New Jersey, he left behind inventions that had virtually created 3 giant industries. The phonograph created the music industry. The light bulb created the electrical industry. And moving picture camera helped create the movie industry. Thomas Alva Edison always worked hard and thought positive. He never questioned whether something might be done, only how. It would be easy to understand the man Edison was, from the quote that he often used, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was born on July 10, 1856. Was inventor, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, and futurist. He is known for his contributions to the design of the modern alternating current (AC) electricity supply system. In the 1870s, Tesla pursued his initial studies in physics and engineering without graduating. Subsequently, in the early 1880s, he worked in the emerging electric power business at Continental Edison and in telephony to get practical experience. He moved to the United States in 1884 and obtained naturalization there. Before going out on his own, he briefly worked at the Edison Machine Works in New York City. Tesla established labs and businesses in New York to create a variety of mechanical and electrical devices, with the assistance of partners to help finance and promote his inventions. He made a significant amount of money from his AC induction motor and associated polyphase AC inventions, which Westinghouse Electric licensed in 1888 and used as the basis for the polyphase system that the business subsequently sold. Tesla tried a variety of experiments with mechanical oscillators/generators, electrical discharge tubes, and early X-ray imaging in an effort to create ideas that he could patent and commercialize. Additionally, he constructed one of the first remote-controlled boats. As an inventor, Tesla rose to fame, showing off his creations in his lab to affluent and famous guests. He was also well known for his stage presence at public talks. During the 1890s, Tesla conducted high-voltage tests in Colorado Springs and New York to further explore his concepts for wireless illumination and global wireless distribution of electric power. He declared in 1893 that his devices might be able to communicate wirelessly. Tesla tried to put these ideas to practical use in his unfinished Wardenclyffe Tower project, an intercontinental wireless communication and power transmitter, but ran out of funding before he could complete it. After Wardenclyffe, Tesla experimented with a series of inventions in the 1910s and 1920s with varying degrees of success. He died in New York City on January 7, 1943. Tesla's work fell into relative obscurity following his death, until 1960, when the General Conference on Weights and Measures named the International System of Units, SI, measurement of magnetic flux density the Tesla in his honor. There has been resurgence in popular interest in Tesla since the 1990s. Alternating current, AC, is an electric current that periodically reverses direction and changes its magnitude continuously with time. In contrast to direct current, DC, which flows only in one direction. AC is generated through rotating machines such as turbine, windmill. DC current is generated through solar cells. Solar panels convert sunlight directly into DC electricity, and fuel cells. These generate DC by combining hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity. Traveling distance. It's safe to transfer alternating current over long distances and maintain electric power it can transfer between two cities. From comparing AC to DC current, it's found that DC cannot travel for far distances. Its DC loses electric power. Electron flow. In AC, electrons keep switching their direction from frontward to backward. Electrons only move in a forward direction in a DC motor.
Frequency. The frequency of the alternating current is generally between 50 to 60 Hz. Moreover, its frequency depends upon the country. The direct current has no or zero frequency. Source of availability. The source of availability for AC current is AC generators. The source of availability for DC current is either battery, electrochemical cell, or photovoltaic cell. Loss of energy. As compared to DC, the loss of energy during the transmission in AC voltage is low. DC involves a high loss of energy and is hence not preferred when transformers are at a distance. Types. Generally, AC current is of sinusoidal type. Its other types can be triangular and square trapezoidal. The DC current is of pure and pulsating form. Application. AC is capable of powering electric motors used in washing machine, refrigerators and so on. DC is preferably used in cell phones, flat screen TVs and so on. So, AC generation and devices are dominant in the past 100 years. recent trend of EV and solar stimulates need for DC devices and applications in home appliances. Kindly comment which you prefer. This technology race between AC and DC reflects the challenge between two best brains in the scientific community. Kindly share your opinion in the comment section which one will last longer. The concept of free energy supply to the consumers is still a dream for more than 100 years. Give a thumbs up. Who wants to support this Tesla's vision? Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, kindly subscribe and click on the bell button to get our subsequent videos.